I used to take the same shortcut home every night after work, a narrow road curling through the woods just outside town. It was quiet, empty, and oddly comforting, the kind of route you know by heart. 15 minutes from the last gas station to my driveway. I could have driven it blindfolded. The trees leaned over the asphalt like old guardians, and the air always smelled faintly of rain and pine sap. It was my way of leaving the noise behind before stepping into the stillness of home. Most nights looked the same. A soft fog would roll in from the river, headlights cutting pale tunnels through it. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of deer along the fence line or the yellow eyes of a fox watching me pass. The radio rarely worked on that stretch, so I'd hum to fill the silence. Always the same old tune I couldn't even remember learning. There was peace in repetition, in knowing exactly how long it took to cross those 6 bends and the narrow bridge that marked the halfway point. But then small things began to change. The bridge seemed farther away than before. A mailbox I always passed was gone one night, back the next. I brushed it off as fatigue. Still, I started checking the clock each time I left work. 10:15 out, 10:30 home. Always. Until one night it wasn't. That night I remember everything feeling slower, like the car was moving through thicker air. The road stretched on, curves repeating themselves, trees blending into one endless blur. When I finally reached my street, my dashboard clock read 11:28. The drive had taken over an hour. I hadn't stopped once. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd misread the time, maybe the clock was wrong. But when it happened again 2 nights later, I stopped being able to explain it. The shortcut hadn't changed. The drive had, and that's when I started to realize time itself might have. I've lived in Vermont all my life, in the kind of town where people still wave when they pass each other on the road. My job at the hardware store kept me late most evenings, and the shortcut through the woods was the only thing that made the drive home bearable. It shaved off 10 minutes, maybe 12 on quiet nights. I'd driven that route since high school, long enough to recognize every sound my tires made on the gravel turns. There was comfort in its predictability. The road followed the rhythm of my week. The same stretch of blacktop, the same radio static, the same smell of wood smoke from distant chimneys. Even the potholes had a kind of permanence. I suppose that's why the first time the drive took longer, I didn't think much of it. Vermont nights can play tricks on you. Fog thickens, shadows move, and your mind drifts without you realizing it. Still, something about it gnawed at me. The next evening, I checked my phone before leaving work. 10:14 p.m. I remember it clearly because I looked again when I pulled into my driveway. 11:27. I tried to replay the route in my head, every curve and straightaway. Nothing felt wrong, but I couldn't shake the sense that I'd driven farther than usual, as if the woods had quietly expanded. I started watching for differences. A road sign I didn't recall seeing before. A flicker of light deeper in the trees. Once I caught a glimpse of an old farmhouse between the branches, its windows faintly glowing, though I knew for certain there were no houses out there. It became a habit then, checking the clock, scanning the dark. The shortcut still felt familiar, but not in the same way. It felt like something that remembered me too well. I've always trusted patterns. In small towns like ours, you measure life in routines. Same shifts, same faces, same roads. Most nights I locked up the hardware store a little after 10, the glass door sighing behind me, the air cold and faintly metallic. I'd cross the lot to my car, the streetlight above humming its steady tune, and drive home through the shortcut. 15 minutes door to door. I'd timed it so often it felt like a rule of nature. The shortcut wasn't beautiful. It was narrow, cracked, and lined with pine. But it was mine. I knew every turn, the wooden fence on the right, the old bridge halfway through, the mailbox painted with a loon. The radio always died near the bridge, and for a few seconds I'd get only static before the signal caught again. That silence had become part of the drive, something dependable in its own way. Then one night the silence lasted longer. The static never ended. When I reached home, the clock on the dashboard read 11:27. I stared at it, confused. The trip had taken over an hour. I told myself I'd left later than usual, maybe lost track of time locking up. But deep down I knew I hadn't. The next night I tried again. I wrote my departure time on a receipt, 10:13, and drove exactly the same way. The bridge seemed farther this time, the curves slightly rearranged. When I crossed it, the guardrail gleamed brighter, like it had been freshly painted. I got home at 11:28, another lost hour, gone without reason. I told myself it was fatigue. Winter was settling in, and the cold air made distances feel longer. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something about the road had changed. The air there was heavier, almost humid. The headlights from oncoming cars, when there were any, looked dimmer, swallowed too soon by the dark. I decided to take the main road the next evening, just to prove it was all in my head. It took 28 minutes, slow but solid the way normal time should. I told myself I'd stick with that route from now on. For 2 nights I did, but on the third, without thinking, I turned at the old mill again. That night, the shortcut felt different before I even entered it. The trees looked closer together, the air thicker, and the smell of pine sharper. I kept my speed steady, counting landmarks like a test. Fence, mailbox, culvert, bridge. The rhythm steadied me, though my chest stayed tight. When I reached the bridge, something made me slow. On the right side, just beyond the guardrail, I saw 2 faint tracks cutting into the trees. I'd never noticed them before. They looked fresh, pressed into the dirt by tires that had passed not long ago. I wanted to stop, maybe shine the headlights that way, but I didn't. You don't stop in the woods at night for something you can't explain. I crossed and kept driving. The road beyond felt longer again. I kept glancing at the clock, 10:47, 10:58, 11:12, and still the houses never came. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the dashboard blinked 11:28. I killed the engine and sat in silence. The hum of the car seemed to linger in my ears, even after everything else went still. Inside, the house was quiet in that particular way a house can be when you live alone. You hear the small sounds, the fridge motor, the tick of the heater, and underneath them, something faint and even. That night, there was a low vibration I couldn't place. Not loud, just constant. It seemed to follow me from room to room. I stepped outside thinking it might be a transformer down the road. But the sound was still there, like a faint frequency that only I could hear. The next day I opened a county map online at work and traced the route. The shortcut cut through the woods, crossed the creek, then joined the subdivision. Nothing unusual. No side road near the bridge. No turnoff. I printed the map anyway and folded it into my glove box, as if the paper itself could keep the world fixed. That evening, I left a few minutes early, hoping to see the shortcut in daylight. The sun was setting over the pines, painting them copper and blue. The bridge came quickly this time, too quickly. I slowed, scanning the trees. There it was again, the faint break in the brush, 2 tire tracks bending into the woods before fading to shadow. I pressed the brakes, not hard, just enough to feel the car hesitate. Then I drove on. When I reached home, the clock showed 11:28 again. No matter what time I left, the drive always ended there. I didn't tell anyone. There was nothing to tell. No ghost, no accident, no missing memory. Just a road that sometimes forgot how long it was supposed to be. Over the next week, I started testing it. Leaving earlier later. Keeping the radio on, then off. Nothing changed. On some nights, the bridge arrived too soon. On others, it seemed to vanish altogether. Once, the loon-painted mailbox disappeared completely, replaced by a black one. The next night, it was back. I started counting seconds aloud while driving, like a child practicing patience. It didn't help. Somewhere past the halfway mark, I'd always lose track, my thoughts drifting, my sense of distance slipping loose. When I came back to myself, the car would already be climbing the final hill, and the clock would say 11:28. I didn't think the road was haunted. I don't think that now either. It felt more like the world was bending around that stretch of asphalt, the way light bends around heat. Maybe it had always been that way, and I'd just started noticing. One night, heavy fog rolled in. The kind that thickens your headlights until they're just halos around nothing. I slowed near the bridge, hands firm on the wheel. For a second, I saw movement ahead, a faint glow deeper in the trees, pulsing like the reflection of a hidden car's taillights. But when I turned my brights on, the light vanished. Only fog and the slow rhythm of the creek below remained. Back home, the same numbers waited. 11:28, every clock, every night. I sat in the car longer than usual, the key still in the ignition, the engine ticking as it cooled. A promise formed quietly in my head. Tomorrow I'd take the long way, no matter what. I even said it out loud. But as I sat there in the dark, the thought came uninvited, calm as a whisper under the hum that never left me. You'll turn at the mill. You'll count the landmarks. The road remembers you now. I went inside carrying that sentence like a folded map. The hum followed, soft and steady, as if the shortcut had found a way to keep driving without me. I've always believed that anything strange can be explained with enough patience. So the next night, I decided to measure the road, not with memory or instinct, but with numbers. I bought a cheap stopwatch at the store, the kind joggers use, bright blue and clumsy. Before leaving, I wrote the time, 10:12 p.m., on a sticky note and pressed it to the dash. I started the stopwatch as I turned by the mill and tried to keep everything as controlled as possible. 40 miles an hour, headlights on low, radio off. The drive began as usual, pine needles flashing silver in the lights, frost glimmering on the road's edges. I could feel my pulse matching the rhythm of the tires. 6 minutes in, I reached the wooden fence. 7 minutes, the curve before the bridge. Everything felt perfectly timed, almost boring. Then the air thickened, quietly, as if the car had entered a pocket of denser space. The sound of the tires dulled. When I crossed the bridge, I glanced at the stopwatch. 7 minutes, 10 seconds. Right on track. But when I reached my driveway, the stopwatch read 17 minutes and the car clock read 11:28. 76 minutes vanished again. The stopwatch sat in my palm, mocking me. I had proof now, something physical that didn't agree with the world around it. I stared at the numbers until the screen dimmed, the digits shrinking into darkness. I repeated the test the following night. Same start time, same steady speed. When I pulled into the driveway, the stopwatch read 17:24, but the dashboard still glowed 11:28. Two realities running side by side, one mine, one belonging to whatever the shortcut had become. The next morning, I filled the tank and checked the mileage. The drive should have used less than half a gallon. Instead, the gauge had dropped almost a full quarter. Somehow I was burning fuel for time that shouldn't exist. That afternoon, I took the day off. The sun sat low and watery, turning the snowbanks gray. I drove to the shortcut in daylight, the way you check a locked door just to be sure it's still locked. Everything looked smaller without the dark. The road was cracked, the shoulders muddy, the bridge older than I'd imagined. The guardrail's shine I'd seen at night wasn't paint. It was rust, polished by years of rain. Then I saw them. Two faint tire tracks curving off to the right just past the bridge, pale, almost invisible in the frost. They didn't go far before fading into a patch of dead grass and brush. Between them, half hidden, stood two rotting posts with hinges rusted red. A gate used to hang there once. I crouched beside one and felt the wood flake under my thumb. The smell was faintly sweet, like something long forgotten. I backed away slowly. Before leaving, I drew a short chalk mark on the inside of the guardrail, just a small white line. Then I tucked a folded page from the county map under a flat rock at the base of the post, with the date written in pen. Tuesday, January 9th. It wasn't superstition. I just wanted to see if time could move differently for something that wasn't alive. I returned that evening. The chalk mark was there, but faded, as if a damp sleeve had brushed across it. The paper under the rock looked wrong, too. The edge was soft and slightly browned, like it had been there for weeks. I checked the weather on my phone. No rain, no wind. I put the paper back, replaced the rock, and stepped away. The cold air pressed against my ears, but beneath it I could hear a sound, low, steady, and pulsing. It wasn't the creak under the bridge. It was deeper, almost mechanical. I stood there for a while, trying to decide if I was hearing the road or myself. Driving home, I timed the trip again. 17 minutes. The clock on the dash, 11:28. I started to laugh, but it came out thin and nervous. The next morning,
I found a voicemail on my phone from an unknown caller, time-stamped 11:02 p.m. I pressed play.
At first only silence, then a faint hum, low and rhythmic, like tires passing over uneven boards. Beneath it, a voice, my voice, counting softly, 14, 15, 16. Then the sound cut. I replayed it 5 times, waiting for an explanation to appear in the noise. None came. I deleted it, emptied the trash, and still felt it humming behind my ribs. That day at work, I barely spoke. Dan joked that I looked half-haunted. I told him I hadn't slept much. He shrugged. That road'll do that, he said. Used to drive it myself. Never felt right after dark. Then he added something I'd never heard before. There's a story about a second bridge out there, he said, tightening the lid on a jar of nails. Old one, washed out in the 70s. Folks said you could still see it in fog sometimes, where the road used to split. They tore it down, but people still drive over something that ain't there. I laughed weakly, but my stomach turned. When my shift ended, I waited an extra hour before heading out. The streets were quiet, snow hissing under the tires. I told myself I'd take the main road. I even pulled up to the light that would send me that way, but the light froze red and stayed red. The opposite direction glowed green without changing. The clock ticked past 10:30 and I sat there waiting. Finally, I turned right, back toward the mill. The shortcut took me like it always did, without hesitation. The static returned, then dropped away entirely. The world outside my windshield felt muted, as if covered by glass. When I reached the bridge, I slowed. The chalk mark was gone. The rock had shifted. The tire tracks into the woods looked sharper, freshly cut into the frost, leading to a shadow that bent out of sight. I didn't stop. Not yet. At home, I didn't check the clocks. I just stood by the sink and stared at my reflection in the window. Behind me, through the glass, the tree line of the shortcut formed a dark seam against the snow. For a second, I thought I saw another set of trees behind it, paler, like a faint double exposure. Then it vanished. That night, I dreamed of the bridge. I was walking along it with my hand trailing the cold rail, and every time I tried to reach the end, the boards repeated beneath my feet. The hum was there too, low and patient, like a sound older than engines. When I woke, it was still in my ears. The stopwatch sat on the nightstand beside me, its small red digits blinking. Around 17, so I hadn't touched it since the drive. I pressed the button and watched the display clear, then fade. The hum quieted as I did it, like something holding its breath. I got up, went to the window, and looked toward the faint line of the woods. Somewhere out there was the bridge, the chalk, the paper, the gateposts that used to hold something shut. I wondered if my marks were still there, or if time had already moved past them, erasing me from the order of things. It's strange what feels safe once it starts to vanish. The longer the road stretched, the more I wanted it to stay. It began on a Thursday. The air had that heavy, breathless stillness that comes before snow, and the street lights buzzed with halos around them. I remember checking the time twice before leaving work. 10:16 on my phone, 10:17 on the store clock. The difference felt meaningful. Like a coin balanced on its edge, I told myself I'd take the main road again, that I'd leave the shortcut alone. But when I reached the turn by the mill, I slowed anyway. The habit lived deeper than choice. The woods accepted me the way cold accepts water, quietly, completely. The first miles felt normal enough. Then near the bridge, the radio gave a single low hum and cut to silence. I didn't touch the dial this time. I just drove, watching the yellow lines drift under the headlights. Snow began to fall in thin flakes, catching light and spinning like dust. When I crossed the bridge, my phone screen lit up on its own. The stopwatch app opened its timer, running from 0. I hadn't pressed it. I reached for it. But before my fingers touched the screen, the display froze. The number stopped at 17 minutes, the same time it always showed when I got home. I dropped it into the cup holder and gripped the wheel tighter. The air inside the car had turned thick and warm, fogging the windshield from the inside. I cracked the window to breathe. That's when I noticed it. The trees were wrong. They looked the same but arranged differently, like a dream repeating familiar details out of order. The old maple that usually leaned into the curve now stood straight. The fence with the broken post was gone. The turn ahead should have opened onto the subdivision's main road, but all I saw was more forest, stretching endlessly. I slowed to a crawl. The odometer ticked forward. The world didn't for a few minutes or maybe more. There was no sense of movement. The headlights reached only a few yards ahead, and the snow in the beams hung motionless, suspended midair. I felt my chest tighten, a cold pressure between my ribs. I pressed the gas pedal. The engine responded, but the scenery stayed still. Then suddenly everything lurched. The car jumped forward, like it had been held back by invisible hands. The headlights carved through new air, and the bridge appeared again right in front of me. I slammed the brakes. The tires skidded, the world bending in the glass of my windshield. When I stopped, I was halfway across the planks, the same ones I'd crossed 20 minutes ago, only now the railings looked older, rust-streaked and bent inward, like something had struck them. The snow had stopped. The air smelled wet and metallic. I checked the time, 11:28. Always, I didn't remember turning around. I backed off the bridge slowly, headlights sweeping the guardrail. The chalk mark I'd drawn 2 nights before was there, but longer now, stretched into a line twice its original size, faded at one end like it had been dragged. The rock that covered my folded map had moved again. It lay on its side a few feet from where I'd left it. I got out of the car, leaving the door open. The engine idling, the sound of it echoed strangely, as if the woods had turned hollow. My breath fogged in front of me, and for a moment it hung in the air without fading. The world felt paused. I crouched beside the rock and pulled up the edge of the map. It was damp, but not from rain, more like dew when I unfolded it. The ink had bled faintly along the creases. My handwriting was still there, though thinner, as if time had worn the pen itself. The date I'd written, Tuesday, January 9th, now looked faded, like it had been written years ago. Then I heard it, the low hum again. Distant but focused. It wasn't the engine this time. It came from deeper in the trees, behind the spot where the tire tracks disappeared. It pulsed rhythmically, almost like breath. In and out, but mechanical, as if the forest itself were exhaling. I turned toward it, the flashlight beam trembling across the branches. Snow clung to the bark, but beyond it, something moved, not walking, shifting. I should have gone back to the car. I didn't. The ground dipped, then rose, and for a moment I saw what looked like another road, pale, almost translucent, running parallel to mine but higher up the slope. It gleamed faintly, as if lit from below. For an instant, I thought I saw a pair of headlights on it far ahead. Moving at my same pace, they flickered once and vanished. I stumbled backward, flashlight beam jerking wildly across the trees. My heel hit the guardrail behind me. The car engine sputtered, then roared back to life. As if startled, the hum deepened, resonating in my chest. I ran back to the car and slammed the door. The noise cut off instantly. Silence. When I looked through the windshield again, the other road was gone, just the bridge, and my headlights reflecting off wet boards. I drove home faster than I should have, afraid that if I slowed, the world would stop again. Every curve felt slightly wrong, too wide or too sharp. When I finally saw the first porch light of the subdivision, I almost cried. I parked in the driveway and checked the time, 11:28. The clock didn't even flicker. Inside, I tried to convince myself it had all been stress, like Trick's exhaustion. But when I washed my hands in the sink, I noticed something under my nails. Fine gray dust, the texture of ash. I couldn't remember touching anything like that. Sleep came in fragments each time I drifted off. I'd hear that hum, soft rhythmic breathing through the walls. At some point in the night, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside. I went to the window. The street was empty, but the air shimmered faintly above the driveway, like heat rising from asphalt in summer. And through that shimmer, I thought I saw light, a dull, amber glow moving slowly past the edge of the trees. Two orbs, side-by-side headlights. They traveled the same path I took each night. The hum returned deep and steady. My reflection in the window vibrated slightly, as though the glass were humming too. The lights drifted out of view. The next morning, everything was still. No tracks in the snow, no ash on my hands. Only the faint smell of pine and gasoline lingering in the air. I checked the map in my car. It looked older again, its edges curled. Ink faded, but now there was something new. A faint smudge along the printed road, bending off near the bridge. It wasn't my pen. It was part of the paper itself. Like the road had always been drawn that way. That night I didn't promise to stay away. I knew I'd go back. The shortcut wasn't just a road anymore. It was keeping time for me. A time no one else lived in, and I needed to know how far it went. I left work later than usual. The snow had stopped, leaving a pale shine on the asphalt. I told myself I'd take the main road, but when the mill came into view, my hands turned the wheel before my mind caught up. The shortcut was already waiting. The woods were quiet, muffled by thin frost. The radio gave a soft breath of static, then died. I didn't restart it. The air in the car felt thicker, like it carried sound I couldn't hear. At the bridge, I slowed. The chalk mark I'd drawn days before had almost disappeared, blurred into a pale smear. The rock I'd left by the guardrail had shifted again, and the snow around it bore two shallow depressions, as if something had leaned there. Watching the road, I rested my hands on the wheel. The hum rose faintly under the engine's idle, pulsing through the steering column. It matched my heartbeat, slow and even. I turned off the headlights. For a moment, the world went black. When I flicked them back on, the beam caught movement through the trees, two faint lights gliding between trunks. They weren't bright like reflections. They moved with purpose, steady and measured, mirroring my own position headlights. At first, I thought someone else had taken the road, but the angle was wrong, too high, too parallel, as if there were another lane running just above mine. I eased the car forward, heart thudding, and the other lights moved too. A few yards behind, then ahead, then side by side, they matched me perfectly. I rolled the window down an inch. The night air was sharp and still, carrying only that low hum I'd come to recognize. For a second, I saw the outline of another car among the trees. Same size, same silhouette. My car, the shape, glided along the pale parallel road, its tires whispering over something that wasn't quite snow. Through the windshield, I caught a hint of the driver. A figure leaning forward slightly, shoulders hunched, one hand on the wheel, the other rubbing a brow, a gesture I knew. I froze. The world seemed to thin around that moment. No breath, no sound, but the hum. He slowed when I did, stopped when I did. I lifted my hand slowly, palm toward the window. The figure mirrored me a beat late, the faint gleam of its window brightening as a hand pressed back against the glass. I could almost see the shape of the fingers, the slight hesitation before the movement. It wasn't imitation, it was memory. The hum deepened, vibrating through the air, like the edge of a song you can't fully hear. The headlights of the other car flickered, and for a breath, the forest between us disappeared. Only the two of us remained, two cars idling side by side on roads that shouldn't meet. I whispered, "Go home." The words fogged the glass and hung there longer than they should have. Across the dark, the other driver tilted his head as if listening. Then his lights blinked once, the faint pop of a turn signal relay. The gesture hit me in the chest like deja vu. I'd done that same thing countless nights, waiting at the bridge thinking snow started again. Slow, deliberate flakes drifting through the beams, erasing the distance between us. When I blinked, the pale road was gone. Only trees remained still and unbroken. The hum thinned back into silence. I stayed there for a long time, engine idling until my breath stopped trembling. Then I crossed the bridge, the boards drumming softly under the tires. The road beyond felt narrower, the air warmer, as if I'd stepped back inside, something that had already closed behind me. When I reached home, the dash clock glowed the same impossible number, 11:28. Inside the house was quiet. The hum didn't follow me this time, but the stillness carried its shape. I stood by the kitchen window, staring toward the faint outline of the woods. For a heartbeat, I saw two pale lights move through the trees, not coming closer, not fading away. Just keeping pace. I didn't tell anyone. What would I say that the road had learned my habits? That time had begun watching me back. The next morning, frost had drawn thin white lines across the windshield, looping in patterns like veins. I wiped them away, but faint marks remained, almost like fingerprints pressed from the inside. On the drive to work, I took the main road. The traffic lights felt painfully normal, but when I passed the mill, I glanced left just once. The shortcut lay hidden behind the trees, waiting like a closed door I'd already walked through that night. I went back not out of curiosity, but obligation. Some part of me felt that leaving the road alone would be worse than returning. The shortcut had become a promise. I hadn't meant to make the bridge appear sooner. This time, its boards groaning under the tires. The air shimmered faintly as if I'd driven into heat. The hum returned deep and low, rising from the ground like it lived there. I stopped in the middle of the bridge, headlights sweeping across the guardrail. Then I saw it again, faint, high in the trees, the pale curve of that other road. Its surface caught light like misted glass. For a moment I thought I saw motion on it. Not headlights, something darker, almost human-shaped, walking along the rail. It paused at the midpoint and lifted its head. I couldn't see its face, but the angle was unmistakable. It was looking down at me. I whispered, "I see you." The hum softened like an exhale. Then the figure turned and the light bent with it, folding back into the trees. When I drove home, the night felt normal again. No shimmer, no hum, no distortion of air, but when I parked, I noticed the faint outline of a handprint on the inside of my passenger window. My hand, maybe, or not. The clock read 11:28. I sat there a long time, the engine off, listening to the silence. It wasn't empty, it was full of something patient, something that understood the shape of waiting. I didn't remove the handprint. The next morning, snow covered everything. The car, the driveway, the road leading back toward the woods, but under the thin crust of white, I could still see faint, twin lines curving away into the trees, parallel and unbroken. The morning after the handprint, I told myself I'd finish it. Whatever this was, I'd let it play through once more and then stop. I packed a thermos of coffee, gloves, and a carpenter's pencil. On the back of an old receipt, I wrote one word: tomorrow. I didn't know why, but it felt right to bring something with that name. The sky stayed the same dull gray all afternoon. The town looked asleep, every roof burdened by new snow. I watched the clock at work crawl toward closing time and felt a calm that didn't belong to me. I wasn't afraid anymore, just tired of the in-between. When the last customer left, I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stood in the lot, breathing air that tasted like metal. The hum wasn't there yet, but I could sense where it would be, a space in the silence waiting to fill itself. I left at 10:15. The mill passed in a blur of shadow. The trees took me back without question. The shortcut didn't feel hostile or haunted now. It felt familiar, like a conversation you keep returning to, even when you know how it ends. At the first bend, I slowed and rolled the window down. The air was colder than it should have been. I touched the pencil to the dash and whispered, "For record." It sounded like something people say in dreams. When I reached the bridge, I stopped. The boards gleamed wetly under the lights. The guardrail dusted with frost. The chalk smear I'd made days ago had finally vanished. I stepped out, boots crunching softly on the planks, and laid my hand against the rail. The metal felt warm. I drew a small mark with the pencil. A single line. Then I took the folded receipt from my pocket, wrote the time, and slid it under the same rock that had hidden the map, 1042. The woods were soundless. Even the creek below had gone still, the water thick as glass. That was when I heard it. Faint at first, the hum coming from deep inside the trees. Slow, and even it wasn't menacing. It felt but tired, like something breathing in its sleep. I stood there watching the space between the trunks. The darkness there had depth like a second. Road running beneath the first. As my eyes adjusted, I saw a faint shimmer. Two pale lines cutting through the woods parallel. Waiting, I knew where they LED. For a long time, I didn't move. Then I turned, off the headlights, leaving only the dim light from the sky. The forest glowed faintly blue in the half-dark. Somewhere behind me, the car ticked as it cooled. When I finally stepped toward the shimmer, the hum grew louder but softer at the same time. A sound that came from inside bone rather than air. Each step, I pressed a shallow print into snow that seemed older than the night around it. At the rise, I found the two gateposts again, standing like thin monuments between. In them lay the faint impression of that higher road, its surface smooth as stone, pale under the frost. It wasn't illusion anymore. It was solid enough to catch moonlight. There were no tire tracks tonight, only footprints, one set leading forward, vanishing into the curve beyond. The stride matched mine. I followed them. The trees grew quieter with every step, as if sound itself refused to cross that threshold. After maybe a minute, the hum shifted pitch. It no longer pulsed. It steadied like an engine at rest. And then I saw the car. It sat at the end of the pale road, lights off, covered in a fine film of frost. My car, the same cracked windshield, the same small dent above the left headlight, but it looked untouched, cleaner, somehow less worn by use. Through the window, I saw a shape slumped in the driver's seat, still unfolded slightly forward, one hand on the wheel. I walked closer, though part of me already knew it wasn't a body. It wasn't even me, just absence wearing my outline. A hollow where a person should be, filled with fog that pulsed faintly, with the same rhythm as the hum. The cabin light flickered once, weak and slow like an exhale. On the dash sat something small, a piece of paper pressed under the edge of the vent. I reached through the open window and pulled it free. It was the same receipt I'd written on earlier that night, same creases, same pencil mark. Only the time was different. 11:28 p.m., the air around me shifted. I felt weight in my chest, not pressure but gravity. The hum deepened until it wasn't sound anymore, just motion inside motion. The trees blurred, folding into lines. I stepped back. The frost on the cars had shimmered briefly, then melted as if touched by sunlight. The faint handprint on the glass faded away. When I turned, the bridge was gone. The pale road behind me was already dimming, dissolving into snow. Only one path remained. The dark curve of the shortcut, stretching quietly back toward town. I walked until the road felt normal again. The sound of gravel under my boots returned. Distant traffic hum faint in the air. When I reached the car, the clock inside blinked to life on its own. 11:28. I sat there listening to the heater's low rattle, staring at the frost melting from the windshield. The hum had gone, but its rhythm remained in my breathing. When I finally drove home, everything looked the same. The houses, the fences, the glow from the... Yet there was a stillness to it all, as if the world were waiting for something to catch up. Inside, I poured coffee and sat by the window. Outside, the snow had stopped, and the sky above the woods glowed faintly blue. Somewhere the shortcut lay buried under quiet. I unfolded the receipt, the pencil line I'd drawn through. The word tomorrow had smeared in its place a faint mark. Like a road bending away, I pressed it flat on the table, watched the light move across it, and felt a calm I couldn't explain. Maybe the road hadn't wanted to trap me, maybe. It just needed someone to see it through to the end. The clock on the wall clicked softly, from 11:27 to 11:28, then stopped. I didn't move. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was whole, full of everything that had been measured and lost. Outside, the woods held still, their dark shape resting against the horizon, like something that had finally exhaled. Tomorrow, I told myself I'd take the long way home, but part of me already knew the road would be waiting, patient as ever, keeping its time. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd never taken that shortcut again. If I'd forced myself onto the long road, convinced that ordinary time was the only kind worth living in. Maybe everything would have stayed still. Or maybe the same minute would have found me somewhere else. In another way, I still live here. I still drive past the mill, past the turn where the trees begin. The shortcut's entrance looks like nothing special, just a narrow lane swallowed by shade. But every time I pass it, the air shifts slightly, as if the world remembers I once belonged to that road. I don't take it anymore, not because I'm afraid, but because I don't have to. Whatever lived inside that stretch of asphalt, whatever watched from behind the glass, it isn't waiting for me now. It's breathing somewhere deeper, quieter in a rhythm I can't hear, but sometimes feel. Like the hum under a song that's still playing, long after you've turned the radio off. Sometimes when the night gets still enough, I'll glance at the clock and see it pause for a heartbeat on 11:28 not broken. Just remembering, and in those moments, I realize the road was never trying to take me anywhere. It was only trying to show me what it feels like when time forgets you, when the world keeps turning, but you remain suspended in the space between seconds. I suppose we all have places like that, roads that know our names and wait for us, whether we come back or not. Have you ever driven down a road that felt different? A shortcut that seemed longer, or a turn that LED somewhere time didn't quite follow? Share your story in the comments. I'd like to know how far your road went.